work of Andrew Todd, and I think, as you've indicated, it's appropriate that I also acknowledge and introduce Chief Inspector Leanne Blacklaw, who's on with me today, and she's replaced Chief Inspector Wayne Morrison since the last meeting as the local area commander for Angus. Leanne is from the area, is vastly experienced, and I know that she will serve the Angus area very well moving forward. As indicated, I certainly very much look forward to working with many local partners, with elected members, as we seek to improve outcomes for the communities of Angus and for wider Tayside. But in terms of the policing report today, I will trust that members have had the opportunity to read the report and would therefore not intend to go over the full submission. The report itself provides performance data and associated contextual information against the local policing plan for Angus. It also shows linkages from the local policing plan into our national policing objectives, as well as linkages that support Angus community plan and clearly the connections into our partner activity. The policing report that is presented today covers the period 1st of April to the 30th of June 2021, which is our Q1. It's a period through which members will recognise relates to the gradual emergence out of the significant coronavirus restrictions that we've all faced. And I highlight this because it makes direct comparison challenging, as through that period in the year before, there were significant lockdown restrictions in place for that period. So it does mean for some vast differences in some areas in terms of those direct comparisons. I think it's right to highlight that from the beginning, but also that the easing of COVID-19 restrictions has coincided with policing responses becoming more and more aligned to pre-pandemic policing demands. We've seen significant increases in road usage, significant increases in social interaction, a reopening of the licensing trade, and the aspect in terms of all of that does lead to increased associated offences and activities for the police to clearly become involved in the normal sense that we would. We have that whilst also not being complacent around about COVID. So COVID is still with us, and the impact for that will be felt for a long time. And I clearly highlight that also before going in to take questions on the report. I guess as we're moving through Q2, we are seeing a similar pattern of policing demand. And I know that this session today is around about Q1, but through Q2, that continued easing of restriction has seen more public events, even greater increased larger gatherings taking place. And of course, as we work towards the planning for the Conference of the Parties 26, or COP26 as it's known, which will have some national significance across Scotland. Happy to take questions about COP26 today if needed, as well as the report. And I guess just in terms of that opening comment, really just to say I do offer the report as read. I know Leanne and I have both not long been in post, but we would hope through our years of policing experience and the exposure into the area thus far that we would be able to answer most questions, and where we can't, we will certainly undertake to come back when as possible off table. So thanks, and a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Chief Superintendent. Okay, the usual bids for questions. Just taking a note of who's got their hand up. Councillor Bell, page numbers.
Thank you. Thank you. Pages 23 and 38, please.
Councillor Devine, page numbers, please.
20, 30, 35, 48 and 50.
Was that 40, 48 and 50?
No, 35, 48.
48, 50. Councillor Miles?
General, but mostly relating to 19.
Anyone else? Councillor Duff? You're on mute, Councillor Duff.
Page 51, convener.
51. Anyone else? Councillor McLaren? Councillor McLaren?
Mute.
You're on mute.
Page 19.
Page 19. Okay, anyone else? Okay, we'll start off on page 19. Just let me get that up.
Sorry, convener, at page 37.
Okay, I had page 19 up. Right. Let's start off with Ian McLaren on page 19.
Right, thank you, convener. My main concern here is regarding the increase in domestic housebreaking. It's such a horrendous crime and causes such a worry and stress to the occupiers of the property. I just want to know what stage we are at with this and how much we could do to improve.
Thanks for the question, Councillor. And oh, sorry, was somebody else looking to come in there?
Your turn, Chief Superintendent.
All right, no problem. No, thanks for the question, and I would equally echo the concern. Clearly, any break into a house is extremely concerning. It's very much worrying for the victims, but also for the wider community, where we get dishonesty crimes of this ilk, and it certainly has the potential to increase fears of crime in the area. There is an increase there. Now that, in terms of the housebreaking figures, relates to a number of types of properties, so not just dwelling houses, but also outbuildings and such. There has been that increase through the reporting period, some of which will be attributed to, as I described earlier, the sort of the easing of freedom of movement and opportunism. The key thing in this space is that the detection of these offences remain challenging, and I think that's one thing to point out on the detection rates there. However, we do have positive lines of inquiry in relation to the numbers of housebreakings we have. So I think that I give that to give assurances that we are certainly on the track to being able to resolve a number of the ones that are outstanding. Predominantly, in terms of the investigations we've got, there appears to be a local element to it in terms of potential suspects and offenders. So in that respect, we have those lines of inquiry ongoing. One of the things from my own perspective is around about what we can do in the sort of the security and preventative space. And I think across the region and through partners, it's about really being active in that preventative advice and security elements. So that the first thing is that any data we get around about dishonesties, we clearly respond to in a careful way. So we assess the data, we look for patterns, we look for areas of vulnerability, and that is included in policing patrols, as well as connections into partners. And in the preventative space, it's constant reminders, I suppose, to neighbourhood watch schemes, community groups, to residents around about the measures that they could look to try and take themselves. So there is ever increasing technologies nowadays with video doorbells, increasing CCTV systems, and other measures that can certainly assist both in the prevention of crime, but also giving additional tools towards the detection of crime. So that's probably just it in terms of an overview. I don't know if Chief Inspector Blacklaw wants any additional local context to that.
Thanks, Chief Super. I think you've covered it in the main, but just that extra reassurance that we do have the positive lines of inquiry, which we're following up on. Some of the suspects who we are aware of are known to the complainers in some of the cases, but that's it's getting the sufficient evidence, which we're awaiting some forensic evidence, etc., comparisons. So hopefully that detection rate will increase over the near future.
Yeah. Okay, Councillor McLaren?
Yes, thank you for that, Mr. Davidson.
Councillor Miles, you had a question on page 19 as well?
Yes, that's correct. Again, thank you for this report. As you said, the figures are difficult to compare with last year due to the lockdown statistics. How do the figures compare to pre-lockdown statistics? Because that might be a more fitting comparison. And other than, I was going to ask about the housebreakings, but Councillor McCann's already done that. There's a slightly puzzling one on acquisitive crime, on fraud. You have a very low detection rate, and I would wonder that if you know there's fraud, then you've detected it. So I would have thought, in some respects, it's odd that there's such a low detection rate on the fraud crimes. But and a final, more general point, just how our staffing levels managed to keep up. There was word that the staff were being seconded by the Central Belt area, and I was just hoping it wasn't impacting on staffing in Angus and Tayside. Thank you.
Chief Superintendent.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. So the three sort of elements to your question there, and we'll look to try and take them in turn. Firstly, in terms of housebreakings, they are certainly up on the same equivalent period for last year. But and that actually is a trend that's been seen in a number of areas across the country. So we're not alone here in that, and I think it is reflective because of that comparative. But in terms of against a sort of a 5-year average position, it's relatively stable. In terms of the question on fraud. Fraud is really complex. I'm quite sure everybody will understand that, particularly during the heavy lockdown and restrictive periods we've had, our criminal fraternity have moved into areas of opportunity, and that certainly has been the case in terms of fraud, where online space and various other areas of opportunity are exploited. So frauds range from the offering of goods for sale and then not coming good on those goods, often through online marketplaces. They involve and range the fraudulent use of sort of bank cards or accessing somebody else's bank details to purchase goods, often via contactless payment means. It can often be carried out by telephone with people purporting to be somebody else, victims' banks or otherwise. Or otherwise can involve, in a lesser extent, bogus workman type offences in localities, or in some cases what falls into this category as well is people not paying for services such as in the hospitality sector or for taxi services. I suppose the point around about detection rates in terms of frauds is that if the vast majority of them sit in the online space, the challenge is actually just around about time to catch up. So the investigative arrangements to detect offenders require digital means, so often will relate to the passing of aspects of inquiry onto our national cybercrime functions. Offenders in the fraud space may not necessarily sit within the local area, so it takes a number of routes of investigation towards the identification of the perpetrators, and sometimes that takes a bit of time to both knit through and work through and then package off our investigative inquiries into the areas where offenders may live or stay. So that's part of the reason that reflects in the detection rate, but a bit like what I was saying with the housebreaking side of things, is that we do have a number of positive lines of inquiry on a number of the frauds that we have reported. It's just that they take time. Your question around about resources, well, in fact, before I move on to that one, I suppose just a pause just to see if that has sufficiently answered your queries on the first two.
Yes, thank you so much on that. It's clarified a lot of the issues I had. The worry was that you're not getting assistance from online suppliers or whatever, and it always seems to me if someone can provoke an online crime, there should be a way of detecting it through the IRL or whatever they're called addresses, but sometimes there's data protection stops you doing that. So I hope you can get past these kind of things.
No, we certainly can. I think just to add to that before I move on to your last part of your question is, digital evidence and the forensics we can get in the digital space is really advanced. It does just take time. The key thing with frauds in this is that protecting the vulnerable. And I think one of the things I probably didn't mention there in my bit is it's one thing us pursuing the offenders that have come through, but the other part of it is trying to prevent the people falling victim to this sort of activity. So not only have we got existing banking protocols with a view to protecting the elderly or those that may be vulnerable in terms of extent of cash available, but it's very much around about being careful for emails you receive, phone calls you receive, phishing type alerts, and we look to try and get preventative messages out through a number of means. In terms of resourcing, then I know and appreciate, I think there was a bit of media coverage that was suggestive of resources being significantly displaced. I can state that in terms of displacement of resources, it is not to the extent of what some of the figures that were portrayed that had come out. There is an acknowledgement that policing demand is changing, and the fact that we've just come off the topic of fraud there is that there are significantly increased challenges in the cyberspace, in the hidden space in terms of the protection of people and vulnerabilities. And as a consequence of that, the policing needs to reflect and respond to those demands. But there is a balance to be struck, because we have significant communities that need us. And as an example, just picking up on the fraud space there, we've invested in some online expertise in the Angus area, but they remain local to the Angus area. So they conduct that local bit of inquiry, and it's when it gets to the point of beyond their skill and capability that they would then reach into that central resource, which is undoubtedly there to help service the organisation. I am not shy in reaching into national assets where we need that additional support in Tayside. And I can assure members that if I need additional resource for the Angus area, I would expect Leanne to very much be asking me for that, and for me to then be going to source that support from national areas. So the assurance is that we have our existing community teams, our existing response teams and staffing. We are under pressure at the moment in terms of COVID absence rates, the same as anybody else. Challenges in terms of the demands that we face through COVID, but also this return to pre-pandemic policing demands. So we are definitely under pressure, and we have the planning for COP26, at which divisionally from Tayside we do have some officers committed to that, but that's a short-term measure with the clear expectation that those resources will be coming back to us at the conclusion of the COP26 period. So I trust that helps to answer that question.
Yes, very fully. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Devine, page 20.
Yes, thank you, convener, and welcome to both of you to the first meeting. My question on page 20 is just above the murder bit. It's talking about a robust response and to do with housing. And I would like you to give me a wee bit of clarification around that. Is this a response from housing or a robust response from you? I mean, I'm very aware that housing need a lot of evidence before they can take action, to go to eviction possibly. So I wonder if you could just give me a little bit around that. And another thing about antisocial behaviour, I mean, you've really talked about the lifting of restrictions, and certainly I'm a Forfar councillor, and in the middle of Forfar we really are suffering from, I would say, poor management of the closing time. There's a lot of stuff, fighting and stuff going on in the streets, and we are trying to encourage more people to live in the middle of towns, and they need to be respected and to be given protection from this. So I just wondered if you could give a little bit more information about that too. Sorry, that's quite a lot on one page, but
no, not at all, Councillor. I'll certainly give an overview from my own understanding, and then I'll maybe come to Leanne for that sort of local perspective. Antisocial behaviour clearly has many guises and many forms, and takes shape in a number of different ways. It's often underpinned by different types of criminality that would then collectively attribute to antisocial behaviour. We, with each case and report that we clearly get to us, look at the impact on victim, impact on community that sits around about it. And what we also do is clearly look at trends and patterns of behaviour. So if we end up with repeat addresses starting to come to attention, then that is something that we very much want to get into that discussion space with partners about. And it's about a graduated response in a partnership setting. So both from the perspective of building up a case, if warnings and interventions at the earliest phase are not heeded, being able to build up a case in that logical manner that then takes us to ultimately the extreme end of the scale, and where there then might be the potential to apply ASBOs or otherwise at a particular point down the line. But the point of graduated approach is very much a one that we would rather get in at the earliest opportunity and nip something in the bud. And there is a range of measures that can be taken, not just by the police, but clearly by into the local authority and other partners as well, to help address in this place. So it's very much about that close working arrangements and an element of case by case and pattern watching for us, and response accordingly. So hopefully that helps just with a broad overview. And Leanne, I'll maybe come to you for any sort of local context for the councillor.
Of course, but thank you for the warm welcome, councillor. So just to add on to that, then, what the Chief Superintendent said, we very much consider criminality when we're looking at antisocial behaviour, which can to the various array of crimes, and that would be something that we would be taking a robust approach to, should there be any, for example, violent offending, etc. That will be dealt with robustly. But we also consider vulnerabilities as well, and I think it's important that we do that. So we'll work with partners and with our own partnerships department if there's any underpinning vulnerabilities, to ensure that people, whether they're the victims or the people who are responsible for the antisocial behaviour, to try and get the correct support to them, to whether that be for mental health or alcohol issues, etc., so that support can try and form part of the preventive approach going forward.
Okay.
I'll hold you to that. Thank you.
Right, let's crack on. Councillor Bell, page 23.
Thank you very much, and welcome to your new appointments. Congratulations both. It's lovely to meet you. I'm really concerned around the common assaults and the assaults against emergency workers. It seems to me that kind of toxicity on social media is spilling over into people's contact with emergency services, and it is very worrying. When you're talking in that paper around they're up by 30% against emergency workers, is that emergency workers across all frontline services, or is it the Police Scotland staff only? None of it is acceptable, but I just wondered what sort of proportion that's relating to emergency workers. I also wondered how morale is in Police Scotland in relation to that, and if you're anticipating any national campaign around this, because I'm sure our local forces here aren't the only ones that are experiencing that, and it does concern me at a time when all are stretched, that people are actually making it worse for everyone to want to stay in a job where they're helping people when they're met by abuse and violence. It just desperately saddens me. Thank you.
No, Councillor, thanks for that, and thanks as well for the recognition around about the job and the role that people in our organisation and the other emergency services undertake. And I fully support and endorse your observations there. It should not be the case that anybody comes to their work and gets assaulted. And from my own perspective, it is the worst of behaviour. It's not to be tolerated. In a national context, there's around 7,000 assaults a year in the last year on officers, emergency service workers, and that's up 18% on the 5-year average. So this is a concerning pattern. Emergency service workers operate a clear and essential role to public safety, and therefore it shouldn't be tolerated. So in the local context, I'll maybe come to Leanne in terms of that breakdown if she has it, but in the local context and against that national context, whilst we've seen an increase for Angus, we do remain below that 5-year average. So whilst the broader picture has seen a significant increase for Angus, we are slightly below, or we are below that 5-year average, which still is challenging because we shouldn't be having any level of assaults. The bit, if we're sticking with that part around about emergency service workers, firstly, on a national basis, there's clearly the engagement from the organisation and with the Crown Office in terms of what happens to offenders that are subsequently detected for these offences, with a view that the most punitive measure as possible can be undertaken. Internally, yes, there is an effect on morale. It's shocking to be assaulted at your work, and that has a deep-rooted effect. So we take the welfare and the well-being of our staff really seriously. We look to wrap around care and measures against and for individuals that are subject to assaults. And that's not just on that local basis after an incident's happened, and looking to try and make sure that we can learn and review from each individual instance on a local basis, but it's the discussions into the national space about, well, what additional tools beyond prosecution can we give our staff? So members will be aware of consultations recently around about body-worn video and the potential further rollout of TASER. So these are a couple of additional tools that clearly, subject to conclusion of consultation, would bring additional tools essentially of support to officers. And it's proven that, for example, the use of body-worn video does help to reduce instances of assault. And so these are things that I personally would certainly welcome. I'm looking to champion from my push into the national setting to try and bring those additional tools to my officers that work within Tayside. But I'll come to Leanne just for that first part of your question around about the breakdown. I hope that helps, Councillor.
Thank you. Yes, to confirm, they are all police officers who are the victims in these figures. And just if I may to add on, so the well-being issue, that's something that I take personally very seriously for the well-being of my staff. It's an absolute priority for me and the inspectors here in Angus. We have a recently formed wellbeing board in Tayside, which I sit on, and we have local officers from Angus who also sit on that. And we welcome feedback and suggestions from them, and also it's a place for the local reps to raise concerns on behalf of their colleagues. Our Police Federation reps sit on that also. So it's very much a positive movement going forward, where people can, it's a safe space for them to be heard. If people don't want to raise that individually themselves, they have a local rep who they can teach that to. So that is very much a positive thing.
Okay. You again, Councillor Devine, page 30.
Yes, you've spoken quite a bit about fraud actually already. I was just wondering if you'd caught up with all these text messages that people are now getting. I've had an awful lot of them to go onto a website, which I just don't. I don't delete. I delete them all, but I'm just really worried that so many other people won't do that, because it's quite, you know, if you're being told that there's a package to be collected, you need to have that information. You're going to be taken to somewhere you don't want to be taken to, I think. So I just wondered if that was on your radar.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. Very much is. I suppose aligned to the latter end of what I spoke about around about fraud. That's very much for us, that movement into the prevention space where we can, really trying to get the messages out around about what the current trends are. In terms of fraudulent activities of that kind. You're not alone, and it comes to officers within the service as well, those sort of messages and emails and Facebook phishing and such like. So just that assurance that the types of messages, the aspects of current trends of criminality are very much picked up on a national scale, monitored on a local scale, and we get regular packages of preventative messaging to look to feed out through our various channels.
Yeah, thank you.
And you again, Councillor Devine,
Yes.
page 35.
This is really not a question, it's just a congratulations, because I think your communications on the close pass must have worked well. I've been out on my bike much more, mostly in the town, I have to say, and not once have I been frightened by a car wheeking in front of me. They've waited quite patiently and given me a good berth. So congratulate you on your campaign on that. I think it's working.
Well, thanks, Councillor. Thankfully, we don't see too many serious injuries involving pedal cyclists, but I'm very much a cyclist myself, and I think that, you know, the increased awareness campaigns, not just through Close Pass, but other campaigns and the various media on the TV and other things, is certainly increasing awareness, and I've certainly noticed a notable difference as well. It's good to hear that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Breeze, page 37.
Yes, thanks, convener, and yes, welcome, Bill and Leanne. Great to see you here. Since this is your first meeting of Scrutiny and Audit Committee, I thought I should seize the opportunity to bend your lugs about the crime that is by far the most common that comes into my email box and complaints about it, and that is speeding. And of course, we have the new 20s in place in some or most of our villages, larger villages, and in our boroughs. And speeding is much more of an issue, of course, where the road layout allows it. So we know that where you have narrow, windy streets, people can't get up the speed to break the speed limit. And where you have other places where there's long, wide roads, people can. And particularly in Edzell, we now seem to have figures that show that there is a far bigger incidence of speeding there than there might be in other places. The average speed figures are far higher, I think. And so I just wanted to ask a question about how you go about deciding which areas to target. And we know that you do, but we've never actually heard much of the detail about how you make these decisions. So just very briefly, if you could, please.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. It essentially, the roads where we target come from a variety of data streams and information that we clearly assess. We first and foremost have accident data, whether that be serious injuries, minor injuries, and there's clearly data in that respect which shows the roads which give the greatest concern in that regard. There are speed measurement devices that help to give indications, and they get placed following community concerns or potentially from data of that ilk. And then, as you describe yourself, there are through road layouts and engineering and road usage, volume of road usage, roads that just by their very nature become more of a need for targeted presence, just by the pure volume and such like. But we are always alive as well on a local basis to the feed in from communities, and the sort of then the scale of responses is applied across the piece, where we would clearly look at any concerns that come in, assess that against the sort of scale of data that we've got, and that helps to determine the sort of policing response. You can see from the report, we've had significant presence from our roads policing units and our local officers, and you know, I appreciate the roads are significantly busier compared to the period from the year before, but there's certainly been a targeted approach to the roads on which we see as the most vulnerable and present the greatest dangers. And clearly the target around about, you know, targeting those areas is with the key outcome of trying to reduce deaths and serious injuries on the road. Hope that helps, Councillor.
Yes, it does. Thank you very much. And good luck.
Oh, thank you.
Councillor Bell, page 38.
Yeah, thank you very much. Kind of ties into what Kenny's just said, actually, but also into the drink driving. And I know over COVID, our community safety officers kind of had to drop community council meetings. And I guess now that most community councils are starting to get back together again and meet, they're feeling that void. But I completely hear what you're saying about services being stretched. So I just wonder maybe if a letter from you both could maybe go to all community councils in Angus via their secretaries, just to let them know, just to introduce yourselves, let them know you're here, and to reach out to make that connection, even if it's not manageable in person at the minute. I think that would go down really, really well. But my specific question, so thanks for that, is around the drink and drug driving statistics. Now, sort of 35% of those offences involve drugs. I wondered if you had anything on how many of them were prescription medications, how many were illicit drugs, and how many were maybe prescription meds that were being used illicitly, and towards support if one or two of those issues were found to be the case, rather than straight to criminal proceedings.
Thanks, Councillor. So probably there's three parts to that. First bit regarding the community council attendance. So absolutely agree, engagement with our communities is a really key priority for me coming into the role, and certainly I'll be very keen as we continue to ease out of COVID to get that re-engagement back in. Visibility of policing and being able to listen, etc. is vital. It's really important for that connection. We police by consent of our communities, and we need to therefore understand our communities and our communities' concerns. So your suggested request around about a letter, I'll take that on board, and Leanne and I can pull something together. I see Leanne nodding, so just take that as a given. Regards the prescription and illicit drugs, I'll maybe come to Leanne in a second, because I'm not sure I would actually be able to have the answer for that. Part of the reason is the drug detection sort of position that clearly at scenes, wipes or otherwise detects you know, that there's a presence of, but doesn't determine the substance. So often that then involves a vial of blood or otherwise. So it can sometimes be some time till we determine exact type, unless Leanne can tell me differently. So I'll leave that for Leanne to come in a second. But it takes up to the third point around about support, which I think is really important. So any person that clearly is subject to a drink or a drug driving arrest come into our custody setting. Within the custody setting, then we have really clear connections into referral support for drug and alcohol and various other addictions. So there's an assessment made within the custody setting for what referral support can be applied. So I hope that answers that part. And I'll maybe just come to Leanne if she had any further information around about the middle part of your question.
Thank you, and sorry, no, I don't. It's an interesting question, however, and I will liaise with our road policing colleagues and come back to you with an answer if there is one, if that's okay, Councillor.
Right then, Councillor Devine, page 48.
Yeah, can I link 48 with 50, convener? Because they, and it follows on very much from what Julie's been saying. Again, congratulations here, 30,000 tablets of street Valium off the streets of Forfar. I have to say that is really good news, because I'm very aware of an increase of drug dealing. You can go to any of our areas around and people will be able to tell you the numbers of the streets where it's going on. And I just wonder, I always say to them, get in touch with the police, please get in touch with the police. And there's always a wee bit of a reticence there. But do you feel you're getting any more intelligence? Because it is clearly worrying these communities. And it is just that there's, you know, quite often a bit of violence going on there as well. So I wonder if you could just give me a bit of an insight there, please.
Yeah, so the intelligence picture and supply we are getting is positive. I would always say we would encourage any additional intelligence that we can get to come through, and we often will go out trying to seek that and run campaigns so that we can best target those that would wish to pursue activities along the lines of drug supply, which clearly has such significant dangers attached to it. And you reference violence as a byproduct there of substance abuse and otherwise, and drug debts and the bits that go with it. So we very much have a positive, proactive picture across the whole of Tayside just now, which certainly indicates a positive flow of information that's coming from communities. That bit back to policing by consent, listening to communities, gaining that information and acting upon it. And it is positive to see the returns that we've had in the Angus area, and you'll have seen some of the media over the recent times for wider parts of Tayside that show some really positive detections that have come in. So yeah, it is positive, but we would always wish to seek more. I think the bit behind the whole drugs issue as a whole is that there are clearly a number of different aspects and people affected by this. We've got at the extreme end serious and organised crime connected into drugs that very much needs a proactive policing target. And at the other end, we've got victims. We've got people who are subject of assaults and criminality because of their involvement in lower end drugs. And we've also got public health concerns. We've got individuals that carry addictions for a whole range of reasons. And, you know, we need to be there to support the whole range of policing across that whole spectrum. Leanne, I don't know if you want to comment any further just around about the local picture for drugs, but.
Thank you. We continue to receive intelligence and we'll continue to act upon that in an appropriate manner. However, just as the Chief Superintendent said, would urge any reporting, so it can be anonymous reporting, it could be through Crime Stoppers, or we often receive information through our partner agencies. So, for example, advocacy workers working with women or with children, etc. So it could also go through a third party and that information passed to us so it can be assessed. And sometimes that piece of information or intelligence is the last piece of the jigsaw that we're looking for, if you like, to take any action. So I would encourage anybody to report that, regardless of how small they think that piece of information may be.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Duff, page 51.
Thanks, convener, and I would extend my welcome to both of you to the meeting. I want just to touch on the COP26 again, and I'm conscious that we all know that it's going to be very a lot of intensive police resource required for that. Will we see any impact on the police service in Angus as a result of that big national event?
Thanks, Councillor. So certainly COP26 will well, the planning for it's been well underway for well over a year. We're working really closely with a whole pile of partners, United Nations, UK government, and Glasgow City Council in particular. And I think, as you'll have seen or heard, it's going to be one of the most complex policing operations to have ever hit the UK. Key priorities, definitely to ensure a safe and secure event, which is predominantly in the central belt, but also to ensure that the appropriate local policing responses are in place across the rest of the country. The key thing for me, and I guess coming to your question, is that there will be sites and venues and places across the whole of the country, not just the central belt, that could be subject of protest or attention, and that be because of either a direct link to the climate agenda or an indirect link to the climate agenda. So we've seen over recent times, for example, financial institutions being targeted, or energy sector premises and places being targeted, and a number of others, whether that be down to policy or position that companies, etc., take. So the assurances I would give is that across all of our 13 divisions in Police Scotland, we have been for some time now conducting some detailed site threat and risk assessments across the country to determine those areas that may be subject to some vulnerability. And the policing plans have been developed that definitely give that primary focus to the central belt, where we anticipate the majority of the activity to be, but also to ensure that there is a sufficiency of policing presence for any issues that might materialise on a local basis. In terms of how much demand we may get in the Angus area, I'll be perfectly honest, I'm not 100% sure. At this point, I would like to say I would anticipate a limited impact in Angus, and I would hope that that is the case, but I clearly don't want to be taken to that, because there are sites and places of interest across the whole country. What I would say for the sort of the local policing part of it is we remain fully committed to giving the high standard of service that we always do to our communities. Our responses to day-to-day incidents and demand will not be compromised by the policing of COP26, and I can give that assurance that there will be a continued positive policing presence in our communities, and there'll be a lot of the same faces, a lot of the same, local officers, and Chief Inspector Blacklaw, for example, will be on and overseeing our local policing response throughout the period of COP26. There may, at different points in the week's worth of period of the event, be days of peak demand. And on those days of peak demand, then we will clearly get messages out to the public. That may have an impact where we have to prioritise attendance at certain incidents over others. But to be fair, sometimes that is no different to the position we find ourselves in a daily basis, which is responding to the most appropriate threat and risk and harm that may face us. So the message I would give is members of the public should absolutely continue to contact the police as they normally would, using either our 101 system or 999 in an emergency, and they should be assured that in terms of public order, public disorder, criminal offences, that we will be looking to deal with those in the same human rights-based way that we do currently. We've got an enviable reputation across Scotland for how we deal with protest and large events, and we've done so very successfully over a number of years, and I'm certainly really confident that we'll get through this period well, and it'll reflect well on the whole of Scotland. I hope that's helped.
Right, is there anything else on the police report? Do we agree with the recommendations?
Agreed.
Yes,
Agreed. Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Chief Superintendent, Chief Inspector. You're perfectly welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting, but I'm quite sure that you'll be keen to get back to the day job.
Thanks, Chair, and if you don't mind, I think we'll excuse ourselves. We've got a number of other things to get on with, but I'll look forward to catching up with everybody in due course.
Right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, bye. Right, let's move on to item 5, internal audit activity update. That's Kathy Wiley, please.
Thank you. This is the normal activity update with where we are with the plan for this year, and also an update on the recommendations that have been implemented. There's not a huge lot to report this time round, just because this meeting's so close to the previous one. We'll have a few reports that are out in draft, which should be finished for the next meeting. But the main thing to report with this today is on page 66, which is around the results from the continuous auditing. Payroll's been done from April through to the end of July, and there are no issues in there, and that has a comprehensive assurance for the items we've looked at there. And in terms of the creditors, we've done that work up to the end of August. There was, I think the last time I reported to you, an issue that was still outstanding, and that's now been resolved, and that's resulted in a revision of the overall conclusion and assurance level here from comprehensive to substantial. And the issue is noted there on page 66, and it's when we looked at one item which had been both registered and authorised for payment by the same person, we identified that the login and the password that had been used belonged to someone who had left the council 2 years ago. When we followed that up, we also discovered that the people at the location where this had happened had also been sharing their logins and passwords in order to speed up processing. And whilst I fully understand why they thought that was a good idea, obviously that means that the control there around segregation of duties and making sure that no one can process something from start through to finish was compromised, and that's why this has been revised down to substantial. There's been communication within the service where this happened, and there's also been communication council-wide just to remind people that they should never share their logins or their passwords with anybody else. There's nothing really else to say on this report beyond just to say that you'll be pleased to see that some of the old recommendations that were around the updates that were waiting for the financial regulations to be reviewed are now gone, because that was done fairly recently. So I'm pleased to see that these have been removed from the list of outstanding items, and that's everything. Happy to answer any questions.
Okay, questions? Councillor Bell?
Page 66, please.
Anyone else? Okay, page 66, Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Kathy, and thanks for teasing out some of that detail there. But I wanted to ask specifically around that someone had started 2 years ago and hadn't received their own login at that time. While that was being looked into, were there any other outliers that were discovered, or was it that sole one?
No, that seemed to be the sole one. The other thing is that the system now would not allow that to go on for any length of time, because there is a system now in place where even if a manager doesn't notify systems people to take someone off the allocations in a system, there's a list of levers that goes to IT on a monthly, I think it's monthly basis, and so that it would be picked up much.
And what about when someone starts the organisation? How quickly do they get their login details? Does anyone know?
I can't answer
I
that.
see Sharon's on the call. Maybe Sharon might know.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Bell, for your question. Yes, the login details, we try to ensure that people have their login details on their first day of starting with the council, just so that they're effective as soon as possible in their work. So that would normally happen on the first day as part of the induction.
Okay, is there anything further on item 5? Do we agree the recommendations?
Agreed.
Agreed, thank you. Item 6 is you again, Kathy, please. The review of the audit charter.
Thank you. We normally do this review on an annual basis. There hasn't been any change to the guidance around what should be in a charter, but when I was reviewing it and having a look at it, I realised that there were a couple of small things that needed tidied up. On page 77 and page 78, you'll see the tracked changes of the items that have been updated. At the bottom of page 77, the majority of what's been changed there is just to update my job title. And on page 78, I've removed one of the bullet points from the list there because that bullet point is actually something that the Scrutiny and Audit Committee should be undertaking rather than something that internal audit should be looking at. And I have included some of one of the bullet points at the bottom of page 77, but it's really minimal changes to this.
Okay, any questions on item 6? If there are no questions, do we agree the recommendation?
Agreed.
Thank you. Item 7, and that's you again, Kathy, please.
Okay, thank you. This is the report that you get 3 or 4 times a year, which just notes all the other reports that have gone up to either the council or other council committees, or indeed to some of our partner organisations that are within the remit of the Scrutiny and Audit Committee. And it's an opportunity, if there's anything in there that you want further information, to be brought back to this committee for you to ask for that.
Okay, I've had a look over the reports. I don't see any that need to come back to us. Does anybody feel that any of the reports need to be further examined? No? Okay, in that case, we agree the recommendations to review the reports and determine that none of the reports need to be brought back. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Item 8 is Margot Williamson, the Angus Council Plan. Margot, please.
Good afternoon, convener. Yeah, if you cast your mind back to last Thursday, this was the final item we addressed on the council meeting, and it's here for scrutiny and audit for further scrutiny, should members wish that. This one's been updated to be the one that will actually be published on the back of some of the comments and questions that were made. So I'm pleased to introduce it. It's for 2020-2021. The entire team really require to be praised for the amount of work that's gone on during the pandemic. And as you can see, the performance report centres around our values and our key priorities: economy, people and place. I'm happy to answer any questions that members have, rather than what I did at council, pick out specific parts, because clearly you've had an opportunity to look at this. So I'll just hand over for questions, please, convener.
Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Duff?
Thanks, convener. It isn't really a question. It's really just a thanks to Margot and the staff. I think I said this at the council meeting. I think it's a good report, and I think acknowledge the fact that we made some comment about some of the tables, and those have been addressed. And I think the sort of seeing the trend in figures from 16-17 right through is actually quite useful. I personally found the green and red arrows a bit confusing, so I think it's clearer, and thanks to officers for doing that.
Councillor Bell?
I guess it's more of a comment on page 122, Alex. Thanks.
Councillor McLaren?
Thank you, convener. Yes, I would page 102 and 122.
Right, let's go to 102, please, Ian.
Thank you, convener. Yes, it's just I think this is an excellent report. It's a very good report. There's a lot of good stuff in it. And just to highlight our new electric vehicle charging hub at the south of William Wallace House, Orchard Bank. It has a mix of charging points, including 4 rapid chargers, which allows an 80% charge within 30 minutes. 2 minutes from the A9. It's an excellent. And also, I'd like to speak on the energy efficiency standard for social housing. 907 homes were upgraded, such as internal and external wall insulation, cavity wall and loft floor insulation. And Angus Council's new builds also exceeds the current energy and efficiency standards. This all helps the environment and reduces fuel poverty. I think it's all very good stuff and hope it continues. Thank you.
Okay, and you were also on page 122.
I was. Yes, this is regarding the recycling. The 1920, the tonnage of recycling collected increased by 9.41%. General waste reduced by 34.12%. This resulted in the recycling rate from 52.79% 1819 up to 65.12% for 1920. This led to Angus Council winning the Local Authority Success Award for the redesign of recycling centres at the National Recycling Awards 2020. And regarding the carbon emissions over a 10-year period, the carbon emissions over a 10-year period has reduced by 78%. This is a great achievement, and as a local authority, we should be incredibly proud of this. Furthermore, there is work going on at present which should reduce the carbon footprint even further. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Duff.
Convener, I've already made my point. Thank you.
Okay, sorry. I think you wanted to come in on a general one on this one. Right, Councillor Bell.
Thank you. Yeah, I know I've spoken to this in our previous opportunity, but I think on the back of the conversation with the police and points raised about the impact on housing, the antisocial behaviour work is really, really important, actually. And I mean, it impacts on our health and social care partnership, it impacts on housing, it impacts on communities. And I think if we were to get the previous point in that paper right around participatory budgeting, I think there's an opportunity there to engage communities in a much deeper way that might go some way to address some of those challenges in the community. So I just wanted to link those together and to say how important that they are, and for us to keep an eye on that, because what we don't want is fracturing communities and divisiveness around which bid gets what, and othering people in the communities. I think there's an opportunity to bring those two threads together and bring communities closer together as well. So I'm really hopeful that we can achieve that. That's my point. Thanks.
Thank you. Anything else on item 8? Do we agree the recommendations? Agreed. Thank you. Right, item 9. I understand Caroline Cooper is going to speak to the IT risks, but it's under the name of Cathy Wiley. So Cathy, if you could just introduce us.
Yes, thank you. This is the risk detail that we agreed. I think it was 2 meetings ago that we discussed this, and this is just according to the programme that was previously brought to you and agreed that Caroline's going to talk about this risk today.
Okay, fine. Thank you. Caroline, please.
Thank you, Councillor King. Hello, everyone. This is the IT resilience and cyber attack risk. And this is a risk that a significant and wide-ranging outage occurs to council IT service provision due to some sort of failure or attack. The factors that can cause prolonged downtime impacting multiple users, locations or applications are wide-ranging, and they range from snow to salt water, from power outage to component failure, or from deliberate and planned ransomware, that's organised criminal attack, to just human error. So this is a risk that all councils, indeed all organisations, face. And the first question I've been asked to cover is why is this risk in the risk register? Quite simply, if this risk were realised, a significant number of services that we provide to residents and businesses would not be provided or would be severely disrupted for a significant period. One of the most recent, very high-profile IT outages in a council was Hackney Borough Council. It was a criminal ransomware attack in October 2020. And immediately after that, they had very limited technical services. They had no data for several days. And even by July this year, they reported that they still have months of work to do to recover. For example, they said it could be up to a further year before the technology used to issue payments for residents' housing benefits is actually back to normal. So IT resilience and cyber attack is a risk that is or should be on the corporate risk register of every organisation. And the actual impact of the risk realisation is, again, probably best brought to life by another recent example, this time nearer home. An organisation with offices in Arbroath. On Christmas Eve in 2020, the Scottish Environmental Protection Agency, SEPA, was subject to a serious cyber attack, which significantly impacted their contact centre, their internal systems, their communication. And data and files were stolen and then published online. And 9 months on from that, they're still recovering and they still provide updates weekly on what they're able to do and obviously what they're not able to do. So for Angus Council, should such an event happen to us, then the impact, it wouldn't just be our inability to provide services for a protracted period of time, but any new work or service improvement just wouldn't be happening. And there's also the cost in terms of resources and financial terms. In the SEPA example, all of the time that they were recovering, they're not doing any new projects, they're not able to introduce new services or enhance services. So I'm going to turn now to some particular threats and the mitigating controls for Angus Council, which you can see in your papers. When I originally raised the IT resilience risk, my main concern was the dependence on the Forfar data centre, which was a single point of failure. Now that has largely been mitigated by enabling automatic failover to a secondary centre in Arbroath. We've been undertaking testing of the infrastructure redesign to ensure that this works. And you might have seen earlier in the annual performance report study showing upgrades to the council network. That provides 2 paths to the internet for all core sites and gives full resilience between our 2 data centres. This was part of the work to eliminate those single points of failure and improve the resiliency at key sites, particularly the data centres. Now, another mitigating control has been the implementation of Office 365 and other cloud-based applications, including Eclipse, which is still ongoing. Now, cloud services have actually proved to be more resilient than on-premise systems during ransomware attacks. And indeed, in the case for the council example that I quoted previously, that was the case. So as we review our applications that we use and we review the technology that underpins that, we've been looking at the resiliency plans and the contracts of those applications to improve the service level agreements, which are now all mainly about moving to cloud. So this year in Angus, our backup moved off site as well, and that's backup's undertaken nightly, and there's an air gap between the data that we hold and the backup to prevent malware impacting the backup. Another mitigation control is obviously our business continuity plans. We need to make sure they're all up to date for all the systems that we manage, and that's been very top of mind the last 18 months. We've been testing our business continuity plans, and we've also been testing the automatic failovers that we've designed. We continue to schedule regular tabletop exercises and actual switchover tests, and that's to ensure that the infrastructure performs as we've designed and as we expect. Further mitigating control is regular maintenance on our physical environment, so we need to ensure that it's maintained and patched. And indeed, security experts consistently advise that if you're going to take one action to counter a cyber attack, it's that this is the most important activity to keep your environment maintained and patched to protect from external malicious attack. We also undertake regular reviews of our security standards and policies. So an example of that has been our recent review of the email policy. And all of what I've just been talking about has helped us achieve our PSN accreditation. Now that stands for network. We achieved that in August this year. And that enables us to keep our connectivity with other government agencies, such as the DWP, but most importantly, in the resilience and cybersecurity context, it demonstrates that we've met high standards of security and control in our environment. Another mitigation control is user education and communication, and that's something that we need to continue to keep on top of. Phishing attacks remain incredibly common, and we'll shortly be increasing our rollout of what's called two-factor authentication as a further tool in protecting against user error in this area. I've also been asked to cover the current barriers and challenges that we face in mitigating the risks that we've been talking about. One barrier is negotiating appropriate times to undertake the testing of our technical and business continuity plans, because that can involve planned downtime. And that is difficult to do because we're also reliant on the IT. Another challenge is resourcing the preventative work that we have to do. As an example, achieving the PSN that I talked about requires considerable technical work, and it means that while the IT teams are doing that, they've got less time to be undertaking the change initiatives that everyone really wants to see. And probably the third challenge is always budget. The cost of security components and services is ongoing, and particularly a challenge those relating to Office 365 security components, which does provide budget issues. So why does the security scoring sit so high? Well, the risk is high due to the multitude of threats and the potential impact of those threats. We're all totally dependent on the IT, and the threats come from all sides. They come from environmental, flood, lightning, as I mentioned earlier, snow or short water, the technology itself, the availability of that, the maintenance of that, and people are another major source of threat, whether that be terrorism or human error. And all these threats are ever changing. Someone's always inventing a new way to try and take the systems down. So in summary, maintaining IT resilience and protecting our environment against attack continues to be an enormous challenge, particularly given the business need for ongoing change and for improvements in the IT systems that underpin all this. So we are continuously reviewing the threats and the countermeasures to reduce both the likelihood and the impact of a resilience issue or of a cyber attack. And we all have a part to play in that. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. Anyone got any questions, Councillor Bell?
Yeah, it's a general question.
Councillor Bays?
A general question too.
Okay, Councillor Bell, please.
Okay, thank you, and thank you, Caroline. It's obvious to me that we would have a low risk appetite and high risk scores on this subject matter because it's such an important one. I absolutely get that. And I wondered what sort of impact the home working arrangements over the last year and a half have had on the level of risk and you know, the impact that's had on your workload, I guess, in terms of mitigating that. Has that made it much worse because people are working from home and we have, I guess, less control about what happens out there?
In a couple of areas, it's made it more challenging. So, for example, I mentioned how important it is to keep all your systems up to date and patched. So you may have remembered that over the past 18 months, we've had to push out updates to people's end user devices. That's much harder to control in a remote environment and much harder to do with the environment that we have. So yes, there's an example where it is more challenging. Another example where it's more challenging is actually user education. So it's harder to kind of get to people, and it's harder to share information quickly in some instances if you've got a workforce that's diverse. That said, we've also used it to improve resilience. This is kind of a more of a technical point, really, but historically, a lot of our a path, if you like, to the intranet was directed through Forfar and Arbroath, and with things like Office 365, we've actually changed the pathway so that you're directly connecting to that application, which is actually in general more resilient because you're taking less steps to go through. So so it's changed. Which I think was kind of back to my point about it's ever changing. So we have to be ever changing in our response to the types of threats.
Okay, Councillor Bruce.
Yes, thanks, convener. There was a cyber attack on Brecon High School not so long ago, and I'll well understand if there's detail which that you really couldn't go into regarding that, but I wonder if you could just give us a general flavour of what happened and how it was resolved, etc.
Yes, I'd rather not go into the detail on that at the moment. In general, schools are a more challenging environment because a number of the mitigating controls that I've talked about, for example, PSN accreditation, don't apply to schools, and schools in general have much greater autonomy about what they do and don't do with regard to security. So I think that's probably as much as can be shared at the minute. However, I think a positive from that is that not all schools have that similar environment, and therefore not all schools would be that would not be a risk to all schools. Far from it, just because of the particular situation there at that school.
Yeah, well, thanks. I quite understand, and this is, after all, a public meeting. But thanks anyway.
Okay, anything further on item 9? No? We agree the recommendations?
Agreed.
Agreed, thank you.
Agreed.
Thank you very much, everybody. And we shall see you tomorrow, no doubt, at council.
Can't wait.
Can't wait, yeah.
Very
Take
exciting.
care. Bye.
Okay, bye.
Right.